wanted to thank everybody for coming out on this beautiful day. Lord knows you didn't have to be in here, but you all came to see me, so it's very touching. Thanks, Eric, for the introduction. I told the OUL people I would try and keep my comments to half an hour. It's hard for windbags in the ivory tower, but I'm going to do my best. We have to hear ourselves talk quite a bit. But what I want to talk about today, the title is, as you saw, The More You Watch, the Less You Know, which seems kind of depressing at first when you see that, because you're supposed to become more educated the more time you spend on issues. It's not a totally depressing tale by the end, or at least I'll try and keep you off the edge of the cliff when we're done. So, there are some things that can be done in terms of educating ourselves. But I want to start with a couple paradoxes in public opinion and see where these things lead us. What do I mean by paradox? If you take a look at the issues, and the two issues I'm going to talk about today are really big ones. They're current events, but I've been doing research on these issues for a long time now. One of them is healthcare and the recent healthcare reform effort. And the other one is U.S. views of Islam and relation of Islamic fundamentalism to terrorism and public opinion on that. So if you take a look at these two issues, we see some paradoxes here. If you look at healthcare, and I look pretty closely at national public opinion polls, you will see that by late 2009 to early 2010, the majority of Americans had started to say that Democratic healthcare reform proposals were now a bad idea. They didn't like them and what they were seeing. A majority of Americans disapproved of Obama's handling of healthcare. Okay, so on one hand, we had a lot of people talking about, particularly Fox News and other right-wing outlets, how the American people were against healthcare reform. Now, if you take a closer look at the actual policies, you find the exact opposite trend. If you take a look at when people were asked about the public option, the majority of Americans, it was over 55% at the same time, said that they liked it. So they opposed Obama, even though he was proposing, at least initially, a public option. But they support the actual option. When they were asked about the actual reforms that passed later on, should there be a prohibition on pre-existing conditions and denying people care because of pre-existing conditions? Should we expand Medicaid? Should we tax people who make over $250,000 a year to pay for expanding Medicaid? Should we require everybody to have health insurance as long as the government helps by paying subsidies for people who can't afford it, which is kind of the idea behind Medicaid? All of these things, support for the public range between about 55% to as high as 80% or more. So after you take out the public option, all those other things I just mentioned, support was between 70 to more than 80%. So you have a massive support for the actual policies that were being promoted. Now, I'm not going to talk right now about the merits or drawbacks of the actual reform. That's another issue we can get into later. But the majority of people disapprove of Obama, and they disapprove of healthcare reform proposals, and yet they actually support those proposals. So what's going on here? One other issue. Opinions of Islam. If you look at public opinion polls in the same time, late 2009 to early 2010, the majority of Americans in our post-racial era, as we were promised after President Obama was elected, or so we were told, the majority of Americans said that they believed that the dream of Martin Luther King's civil rights for all has been fulfilled. So we should congratulate ourselves for this, according to the majority of Americans. By a 2-to-1 ratio, the majority of Americans said they have no racial prejudice of any kind against people of any color or religion. And I say color or religion because there's not a very strong effort among many Americans to distinguish between Islam as a religion, and Arabic as a language, and brown as a skin color. All these things get fused together quite often. At the same time, you see this majority support for alleged racial equality. You see simultaneously a majority of Americans say that they oppose the idea of a Muslim community center near ground zero. So yeah, we're not prejudiced against anybody, but we do oppose building mosques in New York City. So we're against that. Almost half of Americans within the last few years have said that they have an unfavorable view of Islam. So they don't have any racial prejudice of any kind, they just don't like Muslims. Not that there's anything against, they're not racist. It's always premised with that. We've heard this many times. I'm not racist, but, and then you get the full story. But it's just that, that's the way they are. That's the common response. Now, these paradoxes, there's been a lot of them actually. I've studied a lot of these issues very closely, and you'll find very similar patterns when you look at public opinion of Iran, public opinion of Iraq, and in relation to those two countries, weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons. If you look at the surge in Afghanistan,